It's all working.
We're now live.
Yeah, all right, folks. Live from Camp Beagle. And we've got Savita with us. We've also got... We ain't going to screw things. Yes, yeah. We've been setting this up for ages, but Conchika and I, we've got to, really. Let's hope this doesn't go disastrously wrong. Look at that. We've got Missy. We've got Wendy. Wow. So... I don't know how long we're going to do this for. Well,
Sure.
I've done Tales from the Tent and I go on too long,
No,
like
that's
2 hours.
fine.
But hopefully we can pack a lot of stuff in.
Yeah.
And in a minute, I want to definitely hand it over to you because my thing to talk too much. But say, like, from my experience, and having studied, there's a long tradition in this country of the anti-vivisection movement, a proud and noble history that goes back to the start of the 20th century. When actually there's talk of like 1,000 people on the streets of London demonstrating about cruelty to animals, torture within the laboratory. And the movement has gone in waves. But I think the thing that's building up, we're building up this gigantic pressure now, and we've got our debate, as we'll know, on February the 19th. Really important debate. We hope it's going to be a bit of a ground changer because we've built this pressure now. And at some point it's got to crumble. That's not to say that the Tory government, after our debate, is going to make any sort of ruling, but it's going to be so obvious that this needs looking at. But the only thing I wanted to say is that most of my time, and most of the campaigners' time in the anti-vivisection movement, and you can say rightly so, it's been about the cruelty to the animals, and the horrendous cruelty. Like Gandhi called it, you know, the blackest of all crimes for that reason. It's horrific what we see inside undercover footage. And there's always been a movement to bring it about the science, but it's never had the legs really that it's beginning to have now. That's maybe where it's a bit sad in a way that we couldn't get rid of animal experiments through the cruelty angle, which we, as a civilized society, again another Gandhi quote. What do you think of Western civilization? I think it would be a very good idea. But let's do what works. Forget about the philosophy. Let's do what's practical. And it looks like the science is capable of putting the big nail in the coffin.
Absolutely. You know.
Over to you.
Thank you. Thanks, John. Hi, everyone. So my name is Savita. I worked as a scientist and I went through the whole stages of learning about life sciences, went through a genetics degree. So my background is primarily all genetics. And so that's human genetics, looking at the diagnosis of rare diseases in particular. And I worked I worked in a hospital, multiple different hospitals, because primarily the goal was to diagnose and take care of these people. You know, you don't do this job for external satisfaction. You certainly don't do it for the NHS pay. You are there simply because you believe that we can, through identifying what's wrong with them, we can fix it. Yeah. And I feel like my world came crashing down a little when I realized that I'm not fixing it. That we have gotten, it's been so many years, decades in fact, of identifying genes and developing therapies, and we haven't turned the tide as yet. And so that's when I started realizing, hang on a second, are we doing the best thing possible for our patients? And you're right, you know, the moral argument should have won over a long time ago. But
what they would fall back on, and it was
scientific.
a dog or not science. But what they would fall back on was, well, it's a dog or your baby.
Yeah.
That was what you had to sort of battle with. Now. That's crap.
I don't believe that. I don't believe
that. No. Who does believe it? Who's prepared to stand up and actually say that these days? Not many people.
No.
They used to be able to use the mass media to have a dog or your baby argument. Now they're too embarrassed because when you look at the science, anyway.
When you look at the science, you'll be surprised. So I did a talk in India. It was a society of alternatives to animal experimentation. So there are societies like this all over the world, right? And they call it alternatives to animal experimentation. And it's primarily the society is rooted in the 3 R's. Now, I don't believe in this 3 R's business. Reduce, refine, replace.
It's from the industry, isn't it? It came from the 1950s.
Yeah. It's been a long time. And, you know, I'm going to touch on, you know, the slides that I gave, the talk that I gave, but also I want to kind of keep bringing it back to what we're talking about here in toxicity studies and actually other tidbits. I also went to
the 3 R's this year, the 3 R's report they did the first sentence.
Report, yeah.
Where it's the 3 R's is this smoke screen used by the industry and participated in by sort of some animal welfare people for maybe for the right reasons, thinking well, maybe we can make it better. It's never done anything. No. It's acted as a smoke screen. But the 3 R's report from last year, that's the last reported study for the year, it starts with the usual sentence. The 3 R's has the most sophisticated legislation in the world covering animal welfare. Yeah. It's pioneering, and it says, comma, on paper. So we have the finest regulation in the world, or the 3 R's, and the 3 R's in particular, comma, on paper, recognizing that even they are recognizing change needs to come.
I mean, it's on so many levels. If you say the word replacement, you are already accepting the fact that animal testing is the gold standard. And it's not. You know, I've spent a long time really kind of de-learning everything that was told to me during my career and also, you know, during my studies. Unlearning all of this terrible language, and even also calling it an animal model. You start removing yourself from what's actually happening. You're dehumanizing the situation. And, you know, we were just talking about, just before this, about the horrible footage that has been uncovered. And you wonder, how have these people been in this position? How can you call yourself an animal lover and still do this? So you're right. Yeah, the moral argument should have won out a long time ago. And also now what's happening is scientists like myself, and I'm not the only one, I'm part of a wave of scientists who also agree that this needs to change. So I started off my talk by saying there are always two parties: the party of the past, the party of the future, the establishment and the movement. I spent years deeply immersed in observing and understanding the movements, the establishment's practices. And I began to find myself deeply conflicted with these practices. How is it working? If you're putting something inside an animal, essentially putting something inside a black box and not truly understanding what is the readout, why we're getting so much variability. And so here I am, I'm part of the animal free movement. I'm with you guys. I never thought, you know, science can join activism, and here I am. Hey, here I am. So
because we've lacked enough scientists, and because to talk out about it,
I know.
Maybe there's an opening now to talk about it. There was not that opening 10, 20 years ago, because you'd be in trouble, you know, and you'd be ostracised. You'd be the minority within the scientific community at that point. But now, the cracks is crumbling. More and more people coming forward. It's getting in the new scientists. It's getting, you know.
Because now you're getting scientists speaking out, publishing papers to the contrary. But so, for example, with toxicity screening, there was a great kind of panel discussion in the India conference looking at the fact that this kind of checkbox, okay, you've got your acute toxicity, you've got your 90-day toxicity, this checkbox approach isn't fit for purpose anymore. And we need to have more kind of in silico, both computational and in vitro, so our cell culture methods, we need to develop more to be able to replace it. So let me start off with my kind of first fundamental truth, I'd like to call it. So when everyone might know of Darwin's theory of evolution, it has been long held as a justification for animal testing, that just because species, so non-human animals and humans, share a common ancestor, so say us and chimps in particular, we're like 99% similar, just because of that means that they can be used as proxy to humans in experiments. And even even when I was in India, they were saying that the reason why regulatory bodies are so concerned with still using animals, it's not them. You can actually, there are a lot of scientists who are speaking out, like I was saying, and toxicologists who are bringing 21st century animal-free risk assessment strategies. But the regulatory bodies want to be able to observe a change in a whole kind of organism rather than looking at it at a cellular level. And what's ridiculous is we need to be able to look at the mechanism rather than, you know, what's happening in what we said, a black box, right?
Yeah.
And that kind of makes sense. And what Darwin was essentially saying is, it's not what makes us so similar that was the beauty of the theory of evolution. It's that those differences make us so profoundly unique. And saying that we have the same DNA sequence is a moot point. You know, us being 99% similar to, say, chimps isn't, look at us, we don't look alike.
Yeah.
And what I was making there in my talk was, it's how that DNA is expressed in our body. There is so much that it changes. This kind of superficial similarity is of no benefit anymore. It never was any benefit to biomedical research.
But it's, any talk I would give would be, if I was to talk about here, MBR, or I always see it as not as science, but as an industry. I'm not against, and it's the industry that back up the science. And why did they begin these tests in the beginning? Was it to protect our children and the grandchildren and the environment against the onslaught of chemicals that the petrochemical gave to the world in the 20th century? Or was it to get their product on the market? I'm kind of 100% convinced to say that it was a financial...
I kind of wonder the same. But then I wonder, you know, you are losing out on a hell of a lot of money because it's such low throughput. Say if you're looking at, say, reproductive toxicity, you have to wait a long time to get those results, say, compared to, I don't know, say a similar alternative that you could provide. And now, you know...
So if you're in industry, that doesn't sound good immediately, you know. It sounds good for the high turnover, the quick results. It sounds like what you'd want for your marketing strategy, rather than shelve it with good science for perhaps 10 years, because this is potentially toxic. So we need to back off from producing onto the market. It's our case all the time that this place was built for the industry and not to protect our health.
No, I don't believe it. Absolutely. Because if you think about these toxicity studies have been implemented decades ago, say LD50, you know, this lethal dose testing, you have to do it on a high number of animals, right? And I don't understand, you know, where is this cost benefit? And maybe now with the advent of AI, are we kind of getting to this point where we can replace testing? There was a really interesting paper, it was not long ago, by Patricia Bishop. So it was by Humane Society International. And they looked at whether the 90-day dog study was really necessary. So she, you know, the team looked at, 195 pesticides evaluated by the US Environmental Protection Agency. So they looked at it from 1998 through to 2021. And then they found that, you know, the dog study was only needed for risk assessment for only 42 pesticides. So, you know, they weren't using this dog study for all 195 of these pesticides. So, you know, we are now getting to the point, is this two species thing even relevant anymore?
Because it's never been looked at. No, it's been looked at by the industry. Who is funding most of the science? Let's face it, and that's in this country. A friend of mine died on hunger strike in prison over the broken promises. You know, things come in cycles. when Labour were at the end of the Thatcher era, when it looked like they were coming back, they put a leaflet for every person's door in this country, and they promised to have an investigation, a royal commission, a proper investigation into vivisection. Hasn't been one for over 100 years.
Yeah.
Tony Blair went back on that promise. Not only did he go back, they then had a crackdown. And it's, to me, it's not just, if we were in a battle of the sciences, truth versus truth, come on, that's what we want. But we can't have that yet, because all they say, how are we meant to argue about, say, what MBR have said, or what LabCorp said? There are LabCorp's the laboratory up the road with tens of thousands of them. How the hell am I meant to ask for your help on a scientific debate with them when all they ever say is nothing?
Absolutely.
They don't say anything. And they will say, you know why we don't say anything? Because of client confidentiality. We know who their clients are, Syngenta, the agrochemical, and they will not speak, and they don't. And so how long is that going to go on? We need to drag them.
And that's what we're hoping at the parliamentary debate, that we actually have a fair debate. You know, science has to be heard and has to win. You know, the tide is turning. So, like, coming back to what I was saying, that this kind of checkbox approach that toxicity screening has used for decades now, you know, going through acute oral toxicity for rats, dermal irritation studies, moving away from that tick box approach and looking at a 21st century risk assessment strategy. So examine all the existing data we already have and look at all kind of use and exposure considerations and scenarios, rather than, you know, this lethal dose or overloading dose situations, actually, you know, mirroring what's a real life human scenario and environmental as well.
They're so rigid, aren't they?
So
do you know what they put on the project license for these dogs? They get sent to LabCorp. The reason why are you using these dogs? And it's because they have 70 years of previous data, of dog data, that they can compare it to. They haven't looked outside of their animal laboratory, and we've allowed them not to look, but that's got to change.
And that's what a lot of papers are saying these days. I mean, even with, say, computational methods, so the in silico toxicity testing, they are still comparing it to in vivo or the animal testing. And I'm completely against that. So it's coming back to my 3 R's. I don't believe the
you can't compare. Say if you wanted mouse safe products, you don't use the dog. And when you see, you know, that thing, it's called NOAEL or something. It's got to do with the point where the animals start suffering. I just seen one recently. I think it was for paraquat. The NOA, whatever it is, NOAEL per milligrams was 5. The dog was 60. So what are they going to do? Like, when the science comes in, I've read something. The science is that bad, and is it true? You know, loaded question.
Go on.
It's like, to do a test on a dog, let's pick the dog or a mouse or another species. Oh, let's try and predict what's going to happen to the dog by experiment on the mouse. Why don't we do that? You can either do that and get the result, or you can flick a coin and go, is it safe or not? Evidently, that's statistically much more reliable.
Yeah, it is. It's about 50%. It is about 50%. It was a paper by Jared Bailey that it was akin to flipping a coin. That you didn't know what was going to come out of this black box. Yeah. And so if you wouldn't accept those kind of percentages or those kind of odds. No. I think the question now needs to be, you said, oh, what if it was your baby? What if it was a dog? Now we need to start flipping that question and being like, are you going to accept this for your baby? Are you going to accept this poor toxicity testing or this poor drug development? And also with AI, you can halve the cost and the time it takes for, say, drug discovery. So
because say on AI, I bet like a lot of people, you're hearing all of these alarming things like when the military get hold of it. Imagine the military getting hold of AI and all the personal surveillance and all the algorithms. But science happens and you deal with it. But evidently, like dealing with exactly what we're dealing with here, with the makings of the goings on inside the body when there are billions of things happening at once. AI, they say, it's going to have it's all its horrible applications. It's here, but in the science, and especially within the biological sciences, it's like remarkable. They're saying
it could do a lot. And this was the end of my talk in India. So I kind of, you know, after kind of going through, say, how it's harmed human health, and I'll come back to it with Facebook Live. But you know, this is what I was trying to tell them, that the future is AI. That if animal studies don't correlate to human toxicity, we need to be able to sufficiently predict drug response in humans. If you can get better predictions, you can get better efficacy and safety in humans. And even the healthcare industry is embracing, say, cloud computing. So if you've got data on all of these patients and you're able to utilize this, why can't we? You know, it's unfathomable today with these incredible advancements that why animals are still tortured and killed in the name of science. What is the delay? So,
do you know, so with technical hitches is the story of our life.
Am I still on? I'm still
We're still
alive.
on Facebook.
Okay, awesome.
And we're just going to go back on Instagram.
Awesome.
Okay, take it when you need to. Take it when you need to. So sorry about the technical
Yeah,
hitch, but
that's fine.
we wouldn't be who we are. You know, the side of the road.
Yeah, exactly.
Right, we're back on course. Never give up.
Can you pass it to me?
Yeah.
Yeah, go on then.
Yeah, let's have...
How many humans have died or been permanently affected because drugs are deemed safe after tested on animals?
That's a great question. I am compiling a list at the moment, and I'm going to put it up on my website. So I think a good example is to go back in history and look at some of the biggest cases of when drugs were deemed to be safe, like you said, and then cause such devastation to human health. So I want to go back to thalidomide. Now, I don't... That's a story and a half, right? So thalidomide was used as... it was anti-nausea medication for pregnancy. So I don't know whether you've...
That was that was what it was on the market for at that time. It had already been marketed a couple of times under different things. And they'd gone into different license holders. Once a new license holder got it, I think distillers, it was. Then.
So it's, it might still be used in some form or another. And that's the problem with drugs. It can be... problem or not, you know, it can be repurposed. So thalidomide, it caused what they noticed, these pregnant mums, that their children had missing limbs or limb malformations, so it's phocomelia, in about 20 to 30,000 infants, right? So it didn't cause deaths, but horrible limb malformations. And, you know, it got to about 30,000 before they took the drug off the market. So people were still using it, and there were certain countries that decided not to even try it. And I'm trying to think which country it was. I believe it was Germany. And people kind of used thalidomide as the poster child for why animal testing should be used.
Yeah.
But over the years, they've tested thalidomide in rats, rabbit, dog, hamsters, primates, cats, armadillos, guinea pigs, swine, and ferrets. No problem.
They did, I think, a year after thalidomide, because that should have been the end of animal experiments, because it was shocking.
Yeah.
And they'd spent a year trawling through as many animals they could. I think they found one strain of rabbit, didn't they?
One strain of rabbit, and they had to, again, the dosage had to be so high for them to see a mild effect.
Yeah.
And that's when they said, oh, better have done animal testing.
Yeah.
There's so much that's wrong with that.
Yeah.
So if you're ever, you know, out there, you're petitioning, you're trying to argue with someone about this or have a civilized debate, firstly, species differences. Remember that genetic similarity does not mean that we are physiologically similar, and so the drugs...
I say, do you take your children to the vet? You know?
There we go. Do you take your children to the vet? Secondly, within each species, there's such high variability that the outcomes vary significantly between species, strains, of even breeds. So the point I'm making about thalidomide, they used it in 10 different strains of rats, 11 breeds of rabbit, 2 breeds of dog, 3 strains of hamsters. I could go on. Right? They found it in 1 strain of rabbit.
And it was their eureka moment. And then the headlines was, they're very clever, the headlines in the media was, we didn't do enough experiments. How genius was that? Rather than hold their hands up. Sorry, everyone.
Yeah.
Because that question of how many people have been harmed by drugs, we're never going to know. Evidently, I think we've got something, I read the other day, something like, we now have 500,000 chemical compounds. Folks, every time you sit down to a meal, unless it's organic and all the rest of it, all the pesticides, all the insecticides, all the chemicals that are in everyday use and all the plastics around us and everything that we do, every single one of those chemicals will have been tested on beagles and mice, and the reason it's on the market because it passed those tests. We are awash with chemicals. And that, we think, why? Because we had a chemical, we've still got a chemical industry and they've made a lot of money. What those chemicals do to us, they're already on the market. So how many people
we'll never finally get that, but there have been great, classic examples throughout history.
Campaigners used to know, anti-vivisection camp, animal rights people, we used to, now I can't reel off the latest drug disasters. It used to be Iraldin, Operan, all these massive, and remember folks, your Pfizers and your Glaxos, they spend, and the figure is an enormous percent more, it should be you there. They spend, I think it's 2/3 more on their marketing than they do on their research. We had, and that's if any inquiry ever gets through, once you're up against an industry, it skews everything, and it skews the debate. It skews the, like in America, trying to get say stuff through. You have to reach their form of corruption, which is lobbying. You know, these massive amount, these eye-watering. People with these vested interests in keeping it going as it is.
I know.
But that's where you come in.
Well, so if you do want some more more examples of how many more times humans have suffered, Vioxx, I always go back to the arthritic drug. It caused 320,000 cases of heart attacks, stroke, and heart failure worldwide. 140,000 of them were fatal before they were pulled, before the drug was pulled. It was they did 6 different animal studies in 4 different species, showed that Vioxx actually had a protective effect against heart disease. Can you imagine? There was a potential asthma treatment that caused 3,500 deaths in Britain. That was tested on rats, guinea pigs, dogs, and monkeys, and they did a high dose testing. You got to remember, when they're testing in animals, they're not just doing probably a human equivalent of what we would get, 500 milligrams or whatever of a like a paracetamol tablet. They're tested at an extremely high dose, and if they get even the mildest effect, boom, that's what they put in the headlines. Sure, it could work. But these have to show that, another good one. So, there was an autoimmune treatment called TGN 1412. They gave 1 in 500th of a dose. So they diluted it down by a factor of 500. And that was given to 6 human volunteers, all fell critically ill within minutes and left with long-term complications. We have anxiety and Parkinsonian medication, which caused brain hemorrhage, necrosis in 5 human volunteers. And again, they were given a dose at 500th the normal dose, and that still caused. 1 volunteer died from this. And Hep B treatment, there was the death of 5 human volunteers, despite it being safe in mice, rats, dogs, monkeys, and woodchucks. So again, all of the animals were tolerant of a dose 100 times higher than what a normal dose would have been given to a human.
And what about, does it work? Because it does work the other way, because I've got some experience of it. I remember when we raided the Boots laboratory, we liberated beagles from there, and we took when people went to the laboratory, took an enormous amount of their paperwork away. And I remember reading one study about ibuprofen, because they're the people that bought that came up with ibuprofen. They're owned by, like they all are, by some other company. But check this out. So the dogs, I remember, they noticed some ulceration in the stomach, but they're given them very high amounts. And now with Nurofen, now it's on the human market. There's a warning with it. Now they're studying through scandals that there's a link between stomach ulceration. So I read on those dog reports, and do you know what I read? And I will never forget it. It was an old school sort of document. However, this result cannot be extrapolated to people within their own, because they've got to have. These people are doing experiments who are doing these regulatory procedures on dogs and mice. They know damn well that the result from this mouse is a nonsense kind of. They're grown adults.
I agree.
And I know they haven't been out the lab, but the amount of dissonance they must have, and they know. So when there's an adverse effect show up, that's the weird thing with an animal. Because there's an industry behind it, there's a tendency to okay, of course, because it had a counter effect on the mouse, it doesn't mean to say we stop all things from it. But sometimes I think useful drugs have been prevented madly. Please, that's like.
There's a good one of that. Another historical case is penicillin. Have you ever heard the story of penicillin?
Yeah.
Penicillin not allegedly, it killed guinea pigs. They tested it on guinea pigs. I'm not sure what other animals they tested on. And
which is where the expression comes from, isn't it? To be a guinea pig.
It was originally guinea pigs. That could have set us back years, and it probably did.
Yeah.
Before we even actually received penicillin for bacterial
There's a whole load of
infection
things,
treatment.
isn't there? Aspirin. Aspirin kills
Aspirin's a great
cats.
one. Yeah, aspirin. Yeah, it's used in humans, as an anti-inflammatory agent, but it caused birth defects in a number of different animals. I think it was rats as well that they used it in.
Right.
But
it's toxic to cats.
It's toxic to cats. Yeah, birth defects in rats, and that could have been aspirin could have been pulled off the market.
Yeah.
Can you imagine a world today where you couldn't use aspirin or penicillin? Two of the biggest kind of medical discoveries. And if we went by animal studies, we would have. So
in the toxicity, the long-term, the chronic, high-dose toxicity, they give this enormous amount of product of pentyl benzoate. I don't know if there's anything called pentyl benzoate, but that's what they give it. They give it a massive amount. The dog's got sick, has vomited, and there's some blood, and it just gets recorded. And it just been an abstract figure in a filing cabinet.
Yeah, and this is why scientists are raising their voice. So I am so grateful to be here in this moment, here with you guys, and also here in the greater sense that there are so many people speaking out against this. So you've got great charities here in the UK. You've got Safer Medicines Trust. You've got Animal Research UK. There's a lot. Animal Free Research UK. There's a lot being done now to advocate. I mean, there was that open letter that was sent by experts, by scientists to Parliament. So it's kind of come at the right time with our debate going on.
When was that?
So that was last week. So
I don't know. Tell us.
I will. So there's an open letter sent to speed up the adoption and of animal-free technologies and NAMs essentially.
But I think we're at a point now. It's fascinating, but we haven't won the arguments because we haven't been allowed to have them scientifically because of the secrecy. But I personally am sick and tired of listening to arguments about this where you're like, whoa, it's obvious that something has to change, but it's this inertia that we have to something has to move, isn't it?
It was really similar to the discussions I was having in India. So there was a panel of agricultural toxicity. There was the different foundations there, and even they were saying that yes, we want to use a 21st century approach for risk assessment. However, the issue they're getting from the regulatory bodies is we want to be able to see an observational change. So they want to be able to see something in an entirety of a living thing rather than one cell.
Yeah.
And I can't believe it. We're still at this argument here after seeing it not working time and time again. How are we still having the conversation that we still want to use it in a defunct, a false, program? Well, why are we still doing it this way? Was there any more? Oh no.
Sorry, yeah. Why are so many fish now being used in tests? Is it because big pharmaceutical companies believe people won't care about the fish as much as the mammals.
That could be a reason. I'm not aware
I
of
think,
what. But
I think it's a lot of DNA with the zebrafish, isn't it?
So there's a lot of
DNA stuff on the figures when we used to deal with 6 million animals a year at 1.4 million.
Yeah.
There was no DNA, no genetic stuff, which is your field in it. Now, a lot, I think half of the animal experiments are to do with genetics. Do you hear that? Half of the animal experiments are to do with genetics.
So it's a 50-50 split, isn't it, here in the UK especially? So a lot of it is done on kind of basic biology, understanding the mechanisms. So say, what does this gene do? So that's, you know, I might, and this is the problem that I had working in research and also diagnosis. If I identified something in a human and we didn't know what it does, it was almost a reflex to think, okay, let's knock it out in an animal and see what happens.
Yeah.
And I couldn't, you know, and also with toxicity, you know, they're looking at the environmental effects, and if they, you know, what is readily available in the environment, they're looking at freshwater fish.
Yeah.
They want to be able to see, you know, what is the effect of toxicity, and we have 21st century replacements. And same with looking
About the crabs. Do you know?
Get horseshoe crabs, you mean?
We've got information to come from a whistleblower in Scotland. Charles River produced half of the world. They call it LAL. They horseshoe crabs. They bleed them. You know, they bleed the dogs here. And I think
use it for vaccines.
I think it's possible that there could be something to the question of, like, they know the writings on the wall, the industry, and so maybe by using more fish, there will be less empathy and emotion involved with it. Who knows? Yeah.
Perhaps, yeah. But yes, when I was learning genetics, they would take us through the smaller animals of, you know, as a model to look at, you know, basic biology. Because say if say, I know, some sort of mechanism in your body, say, I know, the way we digest food or the way we perceive colours, right? Say there's a gene for that. If that's been conserved throughout evolution and even the smallest organisms, you know that that's going to be really damn important for development. So say, I don't know, maybe you could look at, I don't know, some sort of neurological disease in a human. They think, okay, let's pare it down into the smallest animal to be able to see it. And even now, when you're looking at, I guess it's probably in line with what they think 3Rs is. Okay, if you don't want us to look at it in a larger animal, here, let's look at it in a fish. Let's look at it in a mouse. And this is what I was, you know, when I had to judge some of the some of the presentations in the India conference, I constantly put my hand up and said, sorry, have you critically appraised the literature? Have you seen, is there an alternative? Are you just doing what's been done for decades?
Yeah.
Have you ever looked at what's possible? And even here, you know, that you're talking about the NC3Rs, you're talking about the raw report, that, you know, is there anyone who's actually competent enough to suggest a replacement, to be able to suggest an alternative? Problem is, it's not
Project
working.
licenses, they are duty bound.
Yeah.
This is mad. Because
Yeah.
then, but let's talk about the law. Let's talk about stuff that you can sort of potentially go to prison for. You cannot experiment on an animal in this country if there is a suitable alternative. I do believe that's correct.
I know,
Always
I know,
saying
I know.
it is illegal. You will go to prison if you were to experiment, do one single animal experiment on a zebrafish that could have been done without using the zebra. It's a nonsense. And yet it's our case that there's millions and millions of animal experiments, and where's the science behind it? There's exploratory mad professor. What will happen if we, you know?
That's what they speak about it as if it's some mad scientist saying it's the end of the world unless we use the animals. It's not the case anymore. We need to shout it louder, and the scientific community need to train scientists of the future.
Yeah.
And it's so heartwarming to see that there are people who want this to happen. And coming back to what I said about using it in a smaller animal, just to look at conserved mechanisms, we have to remember, go back to my first ever point, that just because we are genetically similar does not mean we are physiologically similar. You will not find the cure by looking at this smaller mammal or smaller animal to be able to find, say, the cause for, I don't know, Parkinson's, for example. And we were saying before, they've cured cancer in mice time and time again.
Yeah.
They haven't cured. Then we need to cure cancer in humans. We need to use human relevant science for it.
Do you think we're going to get, because we're still waiting for it, like, so we've been here literally on the street, banging out our message, basically demonising animal experiments as a fraud, as a lie. We don't mince about with our language.
Yeah.
The response is silence. Are we going to get, do you think, some sort of backlash from them, or are they just going to stay silent?
Backlash from who? The animal researchers?
Yeah, are they going to come back with like, listen, with some new public relations thing? Because their public relations at the minute is embarrassment, silence, no comment.
And it's quite interesting about, if you use the example of, say, the cruelty-free industry. I know we don't talk about cosmetics here, but even they are kind of saying, oh, we don't do the testing, we just do it where the countries say we have to. They are still party to that cruelty. So they, by using this third party testing, so these contract laboratories, so that's what Charles Rivers is, they are contract laboratories. They are kind of removing the blame from themselves. So then, say, there's someone else to blame here. It's, the contract testers,
and
the country, and
to
the legislation.
Them. They're called regulatory procedures because they're regulations. You can't just go fight, or Monsanto. You can't just come here and use a weed killer. No, you got to test it on dogs and mice. Then you can mass produce it onto the market.
Yeah. And every time a new chemical comes on the market, or say if we've used a chemical in say, I don't know, an industrial cleaner, but now we want to use it in a different way, it will still go through testing.
Yeah.
Essentially, and it's I don't know.
Because one of the reasons we want to educate people, and people have been educated by us about the reason we talk about toxicity studies a lot, because there's something called the International Council of, check this one out, the International Council of Harmonisation. How beautiful does that sound? It sounds like some United Nations peace thing. It's the main driving force behind the global chemical industry. They run the rules. The International Council of Harmonisation. It's those people that run these regulatory procedures. When they say we have to test legally in this country, they go under these international regulations. They get adopted. Each country adopts them, and it becomes their own law. Who the hell are they? And when's the last time they had to have an answer to anybody for their practices?
I'm kind of waiting for kind of updated rigs. Like we said, there are more and more papers. Like I mentioned about that 90-day dog study, there are more and more papers coming out that are seriously questioning these guidelines. Like, why is it still necessary to have 2 species testing, for example? So, the more that's put out there, scientists like myself, you guys also petitioning, having the public involved, they will have to come forward and answer this.
Do you know evidently when the International Council of Harmonisation, when they really racked it up, it was post-Nuremberg, and it was a drive of never again will we do human experiments. It's my case, when we use the term guinea pigs, once Monsanto do their tests in the road up there on their new insecticide on some beagles and some mice, and they get ill anyway because they're doing such high dose, then they can release it onto the market. We're all the guinea pigs. So this drive to no human experiments, I think, to me, the industry turned us all into one big chemical experiment. And it sounds okay that, imagine being in a boardroom and like, right, we need some safety testing, we need some animal tests. Let's test it on 2 animals first. It kind of sounds good. That sounds a good safety catch, doesn't it? Should you have the mouse or the dog, or should we have the rat and the cat, or should we have a goat? And it's like ridiculous. It's like Dr. Dolittle madness, stupid.
And if you look at some of these guidelines about how do they justify the use of what type of animal and when and how, there's so much variability. They do leave it slightly vague for the industry to kind of say, okay, right, this is what we're going to do because this is what we've done. And we need to get rid of that thinking that just because it's been done time and time again, this is not what we should be doing.
All the dogs have a home office license. They all have to have each license, each experiment will have to be licensed. Not one. I think one actually, due to some quirk. One project license has been rejected. I think this century for sure. During the 2000s, in these 24 years, not a project license has been rejected.
And this is
everyone
why I
has
say,
been passed. You know.
When they did an independent review of, you know, the 3 R's in animal research here in the UK, they looked at why, you know, they wondered why is replacement not being covered well by any of the review processes. And you know, these Animals and Science Regulation Unit inspectors and the animal welfare and ethical review bodies, they rarely suggest the use of replacements. So what are we doing if the 3 R's isn't balanced in the first place? You know, actually, we shouldn't even be looking at the other 2 R's in the first place. And if you don't even have the right people to suggest replacements, why can't we hold them more accountable? And this is what really needs to come out.
I've sort of demonised, you know, like, let's all have a standard demonisation of like Pfizer, but from what I gather, within the industry, and there's a Unilever woman within the industry itself.
There are people speaking out.
There are people finally speaking out.
So
no?
At the World Conference, so this was the World Congress for the Alternatives to Animal Experimentation. So kind of all these societies, there's a World Conference that happens every few years. So it's actually been going on for 30 years through the process of, you know, planning this whole stage. And that's kind of how I met someone who then invited me to this India conference. I mean, I was shocked, really, because I saw there was a lot of animal advocates, and there was a lot of, you know, because all of the panel sessions, all of the talks were happening at the same time, you could spend your 4 days there going to all the alternatives, all the happy, pretty stuff, right, and the 21st century replacement, and actually not go to the ones where they're still, you know, talking about how to handle monkeys in the laboratory, you know, how we're going to open, you know, widen the cages by an inch. We should be having conversations about getting rid of the cage entirely.
Yeah.
But going back to your point, that there were talks about reducing, so in particular, they were looking at non-human primates.
Yeah.
So our macaques in particular are being used in research toxicity testing today. And they were looking at, so there was one talk in particular, someone from Pfizer, they were looking at cancer, so, you know, the use of antibodies and small molecule targets, and whether non-human primates are actually adding value to this testing.
Monetary value.
Well, actually,
well, kind of, at the end of the day. Because remember,
value.
Pfizer, I do believe that the world we live in, sorry to interrupt, but the board of Pfizer has to satisfy the shareholders, has to maximise the profit. It's illegal to be a director of a company and not to.
I see. But, you know, even they were agreeing that there needs to be a reduction, and I just don't think they're going far enough, that we need to replace or need to get rid of entirely, and not just look at, you know, they've got these working groups in place to make these recommendations, but you know, 30 years into the World Congress, I'm not happy until we are removing. You know, we need to be working forwards here.
And something has to give, and that's why we go back to toxicology. The reason we go on about it so much is because how many dogs get used in university? Millions of animals get used in university. No dogs. All these dogs. So the reason we go on about it, and I think it's a kind of, at the minute, the underbelly of animal experiments, because there's no one, no serious adult is going to, unless you pay them, they're not going to stand up and say, I think it's a really good thing that we have these toxicology standards the way we do.
But they were talking for specific tests, so like the 3-month toxicity testing, that actually what is the value of using these non-human primates? And there's little to none, right?
Yeah.
And if it's none, why are we still sitting in a room talking about it? You know, we need action now.
Yeah.
If this working group has provided this information, we've done these valuable test studies, we've looked at the data to date, why aren't we moving more forwards? And this is why we're here, this is why we're petitioning, this is why scientists became some sort of advocate, activist, and this is why I've got Medicine Without Cruelty. So people need to be aware. And
I think in any other area of medicine, if there was a load of pile of evidence gathering up that this is working, it's going to go round the... Eventually, the people would dismiss it for the first year. And that's what we're dealing with, the sort of animal testing side. That there's all this information, but it's still holding on to its old castle of...
It is.
You know?
People are unwilling to change because the fear is moving from, like I said, the observation of a whole animal to actually looking at the mechanism. They're not seeing the beauty of actually looking at what specifically is going to cause harm to human and environmental health. That is what's going to save us, right? Not putting it back into a black box and putting it at a high dosage and suggesting, okay, some sort of change has occurred. And so this is why we should either rule out this drug completely when it could be used, or it's caused no harm at all, and then we have, you know, devastating human impact from it.
Yeah.
So this is what we're here for. I've just realised the time. Does anybody have any questions or anything they want to talk about?
I just wondering, is there not a database of all these tests and results? Stop the repeat.
Sorry?
Is there a database for all these results?
I mean, you know, we've got our, for the FDA, I mean, we've got clinical trials, a snapshot of all the species that have been used every year. The ones that have been successful, you never quite hear about the ones that have been abandoned, but yeah, there is clinical trials databases, so you can see at what stage the drug in question has been stopped, so you could kind of make your inference from that, right? But essentially it's not as clear as we would like, because we would like it to be like, here we go, here's these dogs, they haven't been, you know, this is what has happened in a human, we've got to scrap the whole thing, because we could easily then put together data and be like, here we go, right? Why are we still using it?
LabCorp, because they've just changed their name over the years, there's 70 years worth of data, a data bank there. If you try and access it, or anyone else try to access it, client confidentiality peaks it all every time. Where's the science in client confidentiality?
Especially for toxicity testing, there is no strictly comprehensive database for us to scroll through and say, okay, yes.
You find glimmers, you can be your own detective.
Yeah.
So like if we've got any chemical products here, we haven't, like shampoo, even a cruelty-free product, get hold of your cruelty-free products, go to the back, look at one of the chemicals. Do you know any chemicals that are in shampoo and thing? There's loads in there. I saw one the other day. I was looking into some animal experiments to do with Tranent. Oh, what was it? Propylene glycol. I was like, what's that? It is used in millions and millions. It's a product of the petrochemicals. It's used in, you name it, food, that computer, this bottle, the paint. It's like one of those things, you know. And if you get any chemical, I started to like have fun with it, and it was sickening me. If you put in beagles and toxicology next to, I put in, eventually it was getting ridiculous, aloe vera. I was just like, please no. Aloe vera toxicity on beagles. I put in polystyrene. You can read the report. There might be some Hungarian toxicology laboratory. These things, they trickle out rather than science. What about the basics of science? When I was at bloody school, I wasn't allowed to keep my science experiment secret. Can we see it? No, you can't see it. You had to show it to the teacher and the rest of the class, and then the class discussed the results. That's science. This thing, this barbed wire and this secrecy ain't science.
I mean, you could find out, you know, the class of the chemical itself and what testing is going to be done. Like you said, you know, if it's something that's going to be maybe a dermal irritant, you know, this is the animal, this is how it's going to be tested, and this is what we're fighting against, right? But, and also, your point just now about there's always a loophole. There's always a loophole with one chemical in one product might be tested in another product, and so it's, you know, it's a nasty business that we need to get out of.
Yeah.
And there's tons of evidence, and you know, hopefully you guys feel a bit more empowered here. I mean, is there any more questions?
We haven't. Shall I have a quick spin through on? Here you go.
Young researchers have the choice how to turn to animals, or are they forced to follow the herd of sectors?
Young research. Okay, that's an interesting one because it depends where essentially what university they're at as well. If they are, depends on the university. So if, say, they go into if their supervisor's been doing this since day dot, you could potentially be the one that changes things in that laboratory and, invest.
The upstart.
Yes, the upstart. And also, you need to think about the grants that for young researchers. So the the people who are giving the money, right?
Welcome.
They can put in different, strict. So I know people who are doing, say, a PhD via Animal Free Research UK. It strictly says that they cannot use animal-based products. So say a fetal bovine serum, for example, they cannot use that. They have to work around all of that. They have to remove any form of, say, animal product or an animal from their research. And so, I think that's a very interesting angle that we could play. If we are fighting, say, legislation, we should also be fighting these research bodies as well, and saying, put these strict guidelines in place, so people have to think outside the box.
If you want to get some funding today for some project on mental health, of finding, I don't know, link between homelessness and lack of family connections, try and get your project grant to that, or try and get it into mice with some depression experiment with mice. And I suggest you probably have a quicker road going down towards Welcome.
The swim test. The forced swim test, and it's upsetting to see for complex neurological symptoms such as depression, to be able to put, say, a poor rat through these forced swim tests, and just for the people who don't know, it's they're forced to swim round this tiny little tub of water until they essentially give up, and that's supposed to be some marker of whether this antidepressant has worked or not, if they still have the will to keep on swimming. And funnily enough, it was in Australia, wasn't it? I've forgotten who it was. They the welfare bodies there have kind of finally spoken out that these forced swim tests are completely abhorrent and completely unnecessary. It's through people speaking out.
And I think we're going to get rid tactically, bit by bit by bit. The sexy thing, let's get rid of animal experiments today. It's probably not how it's going to materialise. Someone's got a question here. What body is responsible for policing that law? I think that by that law, I think the general, we said about ASRU, Home Office, who...
So it's the Home
or the
Office that
International
are governing.
Council of Harmonisation. Who polices them? No one.
I mean, there's for kind of cosmetics and chemicals in general, we've got the EU REACH guidelines, which we still use, even though we are, Brexit has happened, but we are still using the REACH regulations. There's the European Chemicals Agency. We're still going for. Also, and here in the UK, it's the Home Office.
Always
the Home Office that that's where you get your project licenses. That's where these beagles here have had to have been approved a project license from these Animals and Science Regulation Unit.
I got to cross-examine that one for Understanding Animal Research, forget her name, and that was up to talk about ASRU. They're the police force, really, for this place. They're the people to maintain the high standards. They're the police force. Do you know who they're funded by? I've been involved for decades. They're the Home Office, aren't they?
Yeah.
ASRU are part of the Home Office.
Yeah.
So it's the government that funds them. No. Check this out. ASRU are funded by the industry. They have a special budget put aside by marshals. So
right, wow.
The one from Understanding Animal Research said that every year, I think 0.5% of ASRU's annual budget is paid by marshals.
Oh, gosh.
The industry pay for their own police force. Oh,
my God.
Stinky.
Oh my God.
Any more questions? Any more? Your side, Emma? I think we can wrap it up, can't we? Then if there's no questions. Anyone got any questions before we go? No, should we wrap it up there then?
Yeah.
Yeah? Right
Well,
then.
thank you everyone. Yeah, I mean, this information will be popped on my website, and yeah, let me know if you've got any more questions.
Yeah, write in any questions, we'll pass them on. All right, folks, love yous. It's all right, isn't it?
That was lovely, thank you.
Well done, guys.
I enjoyed it.